Once, a flight attendant who was used to making rules slaps a mother holding a baby without realizing that the airline owner is watching. What happens next? Well, let's just say no one saw that coming. Stay tuned until the end because once the truth comes out, there's no going back. Before we start the story, let us know where in the world you are watching from today. If you like stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Vanessa Holt walked through the airport with confidence. Her uniform was clean, and her posture was straight. Every step she took made it clear that she was in charge. She had worked hard for years to get to this point and was now ruling the first-class cabin like it was her own kingdom. Passengers were just names on a manifest, and if they didn't fit her idea of what belonged in first class, she had no problem letting them know. She believed in rules and most of the time, she was right. She thought she was in charge, but today one mistake, one moment of impatience, one act of arrogance, would ruin everything she had worked for, and she had no idea it was going to happen. The boarding process had gone smoothly, just like on any other flight. First-class passengers got there early, took their seats, sipped their welcome drinks, and settled in for a comfortable flight. The sound of luggage rolling down the aisle was mixed with quiet conversations and the soft chime of announcements. Vanessa watched Most of the people close by were businessmen, wealthy travelers, and frequent flyers who knew the routine. Then Vanessa saw Olivia Carter walk onto the plane carrying a baby and putting a small bag on her shoulder. Vanessa's eyes narrowed at the sight of a baby in first class. She hated it when that happened because first class was supposed to be quiet and private, and the last thing it needed was a crying baby disturbing the other people there. She forced a smile as Olivia approached her. "Ma'am, may I assist you?" she asked, her voice polite but stern, and she hoped Olivia would get the hint. Olivia smiled tiredly while adjusting the baby in her arms and said, "I'm fine, thank you." She reached into her bag and handed over her ticket. Vanessa barely glanced at it before speaking. First class is for passengers seeking a relaxing experience. Perhaps she'd be more comfortable in economy. She tilted her head slightly, expecting Olivia to step back to move quietly and avoid trouble. Olivia blinked for a moment, confused. Then frowned and said, "I have a first-class ticket." The way she said it annoyed Vanessa because it sounded like she actually belonged there. Vanessa looked at the ticket again, reading the name and then the seat number. It was correct, but she still didn't like it. She gave Olivia the ticket back with a tight smile, making sure Olivia nodded before shifting her baby again and walking past her to get to her seat. As she walked down the aisle, some people looked at her, some curious, some already mad at the sight of it. In first class, she ignored them while focusing on getting settled. She put her bag under the seat and adjusted a small blanket over her baby's back. Vanessa watched from a distance, slowly getting irritated. The baby was quiet now, but she knew how these flights went. They would start with quiet noises, then crying, and then complaints from other passengers. She had seen it happen before and wasn't going to let it happen again. She had a way of handling things, and today would be no different. Vanessa kept her eyes on Olivia, her anger just below the surface. She watched as Olivia sat down and tried to keep the baby calm by putting the baby against her chest. The mother looked tired, and her movements were slow and careful, as if she was ready to be judged. Vanessa had seen parents with young children always on edge, afraid of upsetting other passengers, but in Vanessa's case, what she saw was a mother who was trying to keep her child calm. First class wasn't for babies crying or tired moms. It was for business travelers, executives, and people who knew how important a quiet flight was. She took a deep breath and forced a smile as she walked down the aisle, greeting other passengers, offering drinks, and making sure everything was in order. But every so often, her eyes kept going back to Olivia. She was waiting for a reason, any reason, to show that this woman shouldn't be here. It didn't take long for the baby to let out a soft whimper. Olivia quickly rocked him while whispering something soothing. Vanessa only needed to hear that one sound, so she quickly turned around and walked back to Olivia's seat, stopping next to her with her heels clicking on the carpet to make it clear she didn't want anyone else to hear. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to keep your child quiet. Other passengers have paid for a peaceful experience," she said in a polite but firm tone. Olivia looked up startled. "I know." Vanessa stiffly nodded but didn't move. "I understand, but if he continues to make noise, I may have to ask you to move to a different seat," Olivia said. "A different seat? I paid for this one." Vanessa sighed and shifted her weight. "I understand, ma'am, but first class is a space for passengers looking for an uninterrupted flight. I'm just saying that if he becomes a distraction, I may need to make adjustments," Olivia said. A few other passengers looked over, sensing the tension. Olivia said. Holding Vanessa's gaze and tightening her grip on the baby, she said, "I'll keep him calm." This time, Vanessa hesitated, then gave a tight nod before walking away. But she wasn't done yet. She knew the baby would cry again, and when he did, she'd be ready. She was busy with small tasks like handing out drinks and checking on passengers, but she kept her ears open for another sound. As soon as she heard the baby's small, tired cry, she turned around and said, "Ma'am, I need to ask you to control your child." A murmur went through the first-class cabin, making some people move uncomfortably and others look at each other as if they could sense an argument. Olivia looked up, her face showing anger and frustration. "I am trying," she said, her voice tight. "He's just a baby." Vanessa crossed her arms, suggesting that maybe first class wasn't the best choice. The air around them became thick with silence, and Olivia stared at Vanessa, her jaw tightening from exhaustion mixed with anger. Before Olivia could say anything, a voice from the row behind her said, "She has a first-class ticket, leave her alone." Vanessa turned her attention to the voice's source and saw an older man in a navy suit watching the conversation with mild irritation. A few other passengers were also paying full attention, their faces showing a range of emotions from discomfort to quiet disapproval. Vanessa straightened up and forced a smile. "I'm just making sure that everyone enjoys their flight, sir." The man didn't seem convinced. "It doesn't look like you're ensuring much of anything except annoying a mother and child." There were whispers in the cabin, and Vanessa's face got hot. This wasn't how she had planned things to go. She had to take back control. Quickly turning back to Olivia, she forced the finality into her voice. "Ma'am, if your baby continues to be disruptive, I will have to move you." Olivia stared at her for a long moment, her expression impossible to read. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, typed a short message, and pressed send. Vanessa had no idea what she meant. Vanessa watched as Olivia quickly put her phone back in her bag. The woman's action seemed almost dismissive, which annoyed Vanessa. She was expecting an argument or some kind of resistance, but all she saw was Olivia texting someone. Olivia would soon learn that texting wasn't going to change anything, but Vanessa was in charge and made her point clear by turning sharply and walking toward the front. Vanessa had taken care of the problem, she thought, as she walked out of the cabin with her heels clicking against the carpet. Olivia would either keep her baby quiet or get moved to economy, she thought. A few minutes later, as she was serving champagne to a businessman in the front row, she noticed something. The captain had stepped out of the cockpit, which was strange for a mid-flight occurrence. Even stranger, he was talking quietly with another flight attendant near the galley, his brows furrowed as if something important had happened. Vanessa's stomach tensed a little, but she quickly told herself it didn't have anything to do with her. She went back to her routine of refilling drinks, checking seat belts, and making sure everything was running smoothly. But as she turned back down the aisle, she noticed something else. One of the first-class passengers had his phone out and was reading something. With wide eyes, he nudged the man next to him and whispered something. Then another passenger pulled out their phone and raised their brows as they scrolled. Vanessa's frown got worse as she walked past them as if she didn't notice, but she could feel a shift in the air, the quiet buzz of anticipation as if people knew something she didn't. Then the intercom cracked, and the captain's voice came through, calm, steady, but with an air of authority that made everyone pay attention right away. Vanessa Holt, please report to the cockpit immediately. A few passengers turned their heads toward her, exchanging glances. Vanessa forced a polite smile and nodded toward a flight attendant near the galley. Cover the cabin, she said smoothly as she made her way to the front. As she walked past the first-class passengers, she could feel their eyes on her. The people who were reading something on their phones seemed especially interested, which bothered her because she hated being left out of the loop. She had a growing feeling that whatever was going on had something to do with Olivia's text message when she was pregnant. When Vanessa got to the cockpit door, she knocked once and then stepped inside. As soon as she did, she could feel the tension in the air. The captain, who was known for being very professional, stood with his arms crossed. The flight supervisor was already there, standing near the radio controls with a serious face. Vanessa's stomach twisted a little because she had never been called into the cockpit like this before. The captain didn't waste any time asking Vanessa, "Do you know who's on this flight?" Vanessa blinked and said, "Of course, sir." During boarding, first-class passengers were checked. The captain looked at the supervisor and then back at her. "Did you happen to notice who you were talking to back there?" he asked. "A mother who was disturbing the first-class cabin." "I was simply enforcing policy. You put your hands on her." The supervisor cut him off sharply. "No, I only warned her to keep the baby quiet," Vanessa quickly replied. "That's it." The captain sighed heavily and rubbed his chin. Temple then reached for the radio controls and pressed a button. A deep, calm voice came through the speaker, sending a chill down Vanessa's spine. It was James Carter, the CEO and owner of the airline, who had the power to fire her with a single phone call. Olivia wasn't just a passenger, she was his wife. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. The radio crackled again, but James Carter didn't say it again because he didn't need to. His words hung in the air like a sharp blade slicing through any confidence she had left. She felt her heart beating in her ears and her mouth opening slightly but not saying anything. She had talked to hundreds of passengers before and made sure everyone followed the rules on every flight, but this was different. The captain slowly breathed out after watching her reaction. "I'll ask again," he said in a lower voice. "Do you understand what you just did?" Vanessa forced herself to. The supervisor let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "So it's only a problem because of who she is, his fresh and darken," he said. "Not because you treated a paying first-class passenger like she didn't belong." Vanessa's hands clenched at her sides. She didn't like where this was going and needed to fix it quickly. "I was only following policy," she said. "Babies in first class can bother other passengers. I was trying to keep the experience for everyone else." The captain's jaw tightened. "You embarrassed a woman with a valid first-class ticket by saying she didn't belong, and now you're standing here trying to defend yourself." Vanessa's breath got faster. "I wasn't trying to embarrass her," she said. The radio clicked again, and James Carter's voice cut through the cabin. "Stop talking," he said. Vanessa shut her mouth right away. The silence that followed was suffocating. James's voice stayed calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it now. "Captain, I want her removed from duty right away." Vanessa's body went rigid. "Wait, what?" The captain didn't even seem surprised. He just nodded and looked at the supervisor. "You're relieved," the supervisor said flatly. "For the rest of this flight you will sit in the crew jump seat and not interact with passengers. When we land you will report directly to an administrative review." Vanessa felt the ground beneath her shift and whispered, "You can't be serious." The captain's eyes locked on hers, and she knew this wasn't a simple warning, this wasn't a minor. She was upset that her career was over because she had worked hard for years, followed all the rules, climbed the ranks, and made sure she was respected. She wasn't about to be fired like an incompetent rookie. She took a shaky step forward and forced a calm tone into her voice. "Captain, please," she said. "I understand now. I'll apologize. All you don't understand anything," the supervisor interrupted. "And the fact that you still think you can talk your way out of this proves it." The radio went off again, and James Carter spoke. "One last time, Vanessa Holt will not be working another flight for this airline ever." Those words hit her harder than anything else. They made her stomach twist violently and her knees weak. The captain pressed the intercom button. His voice was calm but firm. He understood Sir Vanessa's hands shook. She whispered, "Wait," but no one answered. The supervisor just pointed to the cockpit door and said, "You need to leave now." For the first time in her career, Vanessa felt helpless. She had no control. She had nowhere to run. She tensed up as reality hit her. The cockpit, which she had always associated with authority and control, felt like it was suffocating. She wanted to argue and fight back, but for the first time in her career, she realized that no one was going to listen. The captain kept his eyes on her, waiting, and the supervisor's arms were crossed, making it impossible to read his face. The radio stayed silent, but Vanessa could still feel James Carter's presence like a shadow over everything. She swallowed hard and said, "This is a mistake." When she saw the captain's face, her words stopped when she saw the look on his face. "Pardon," he said simply, "leave." Vanessa forced her legs to move and stepped back toward the door. With trembling fingers, she turned the handle and pushed it open. As soon as she stepped out of the cockpit, the whispers began. People were already watching. Some tried to hide it by looking at their phones or out the window, but others didn't try. People were paying close attention to her as she walked by, and some even exchanged looks as if to confirm what they had just heard. Vanessa's heart was racing. She had walked through the 1,000 times before, always feeling competent and in charge. Now, every step felt like a public humiliation. She kept her head up, trying to ignore the stares and the burning feeling in her face, but as she got closer to the first-class section, she heard it. "Do you still think I'm right?" Vanessa froze. Olivia was watching her. Olivia was sitting comfortably in her seat with her baby on her chest and her fingers gently adjusting the blanket. Olivia's expression wasn't smug or mocking. It was patient, like she was waiting for an answer Vanessa didn't know how to give. For a moment, Vanessa thought about responding. She thought about making an excuse or defense, but what could she say? She had been so sure that Olivia didn't belong in first class that she was just another passenger causing trouble. Now Vanessa was being taken away, and her throat tightened. Without saying a word, she turned and walked past Olivia, her heavy footsteps following her to the back of the plane. The passengers didn't even try to hide what they were saying. She was fired in the middle of the flight. I can't believe she thought she could get away with that. Vanessa clenched her jaw and her hands into fists. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. But as she reached the crew jump seat end, Vanessa sat stiffly in the crew jump seat, her back against the wall and her hands and fists on her lap. She could feel every vibration of the plane and every murmur from the people behind her. The soft noise of some of the engine should have been background noise, but all she could hear was her own heart beating in her ears. She had never sat here before, not like this. This seat was meant for trainees and people who needed help, but she had no idea how to use it. As she stood near the galley, Mia hesitated, her eyes darting to Vanessa. She looked tense, like she wasn't sure what to say. Eventually, she spoke, her voice warning, "Are you okay?" Vanessa snapped her head up and hissed, "Do I look okay?" Mia flinched slightly but didn't move away. I didn't think it would be this serious," she admitted. "I mean getting removed from duty mid-flight." Vanessa muttered. "Shut up," Mia pressed her lips together. "I don't think you understand how bad this is," Mia said with a sigh. "Oh, I get it," Vanessa replied. "I get that a baby was crying in first class. I get that I tried to enforce a policy that every other flight attendant here is too scared to enforce. I get that now that she's married to him, I'm suddenly the villain." Mia looked at her for a long time before shaking her head. "Vanessa, you don't get it." Vanessa's jaw clenched. "You didn't lose your job because of a crying baby," Mia said. "You lost it because you thought that the woman didn't belong, and you didn't even check to see who she was before trying to push her out." Vanessa's hands gripped the edges of her seat. "Passengers complain about babies all the time," Mia agreed, "but they don't slack the people holding them." Vanessa froze. "People saw Vanessa the way you grabbed her arm and spoke to her. If it weren't for the slap, maybe you'd still have a chance to talk your way out of this," Mia said. "But now it's over." Vanessa shook her head. The slack lap. Olivia had been ignoring her and shaking her off like she didn't matter, and Vanessa had pretended that it wasn't a big deal, it was just a warning, to show Olivia that she was in charge. But now that it was over, she had lost everything, her throat felt dry, she could have just let it go. Vanessa muttered. Mia's face turned cold. "She did let it go," she said. "She didn't argue, she didn't yell, she didn't call for help, she didn't demand anything," she pointed. "First class, all she did was send one text message." Vanessa clenched her fist and Mia looked at her with pity before leaving Vanessa alone with her thoughts. Vanessa had spent years making sure she was in charge and that everyone followed her rules, but now she was stuck in the back, powerless, and the worst part was that this was just the start of what James Carter had planned for her. The plane kept cruising, but Vanessa barely noticed her body sitting still in the jump seat, her mind racing through all the. She tried every possible way to fix this, but James Carter had already made up his mind. She knew there had to be something she could do, and her heart pounded as she reached for her phone. Maybe if she sent an email to HR before they landed, she could get ahead of this, or she could claim a misunderstanding and change the story before it was too late. But as soon as she unlocked her phone, her stomach dropped. Her work email had already been disabled, and her employee login was gone. A new wave of panic spread. It was happening faster than she thought. James Carter wasn't just firing her, he was firing her completely. She clenched her teeth and turned her head to look at the first-class cabin out of the corner of her eye. Olivia was rocking her baby gently and calmly, as if nothing was wrong. A few first-class passengers were still whispering, their eyes flickering toward her every once in a while. They all knew she swallowed hard. This wasn't just about losing her job, it was about the way she was losing it. It wasn't quiet. She wasn't waiting for a simple termination email at headquarters. It was public humiliation happening in front of every passenger and crew member. Her hands clenched as she thought about Olivia again. Olivia hadn't done much when Vanessa grabbed her arm. She hadn't yelled or demanded Vanessa be taken off. She had just pulled out her phone and sent that text, which was what scared Vanessa the most because if Olivia had made a scene or argued, Vanessa might have. Olivia could have let her off the hook by saying the mother was being rude and uncooperative, but she didn't. Instead, she let James Carter handle it, and he did right away. Vanessa's heart raced. This wasn't just an angry husband protecting his wife. This was power, power that didn't need to yell or warn. This was power that just erased people. She took a deep breath and forced herself to sit still. The flight wasn't over yet. There was still time. If she begged the captain for another chance, she might be able to save the situation, and maybe James Carter would change his mind. But she knew in her heart that there was no way to fix it. This wasn't just about today's flight. James Carter was going to make sure she never worked in the airline industry again. Vanessa gripped the armrest of the crew jump seat again, and the realization that this wasn't just a suspension but a complete eraser was sinking in like a heavy weight on her shoulders. Her chest. She forced herself to breathe evenly, but control was slipping further away with each second. Until now, she had been the one giving orders, making decisions, and controlling the outcome. Now, she was just waiting for the plane to land, waiting for her fate to be sealed. The whispers in first class hadn't stopped. She could feel them watching her, their stares cutting into her like knives. Some people spoke quietly, probably guessing what would happen next, while others stole quick glances. Olivia was sitting there calmly rocking her baby. Olivia hadn't looked at Vanessa at all since their last conversation. Olivia's face was almost serene, as if none of this had ever been a problem for her, as if she had known from the start how this was going to end. Vanessa felt something hot rise in her throat. She wasn't used to feeling helpless. She straightened her back and refused to shrink into herself. This couldn't be the end. She had worked too hard and given up too much. She couldn't let one mistake ruin everything. She looked over at Mia, who was organizing drink trays in the galley. She had to try, even if it was desperate or a long shot. She had to do something. She took a deep breath and waved Mia over. The younger flight attendant hesitated and walked toward Vanessa, her face showing that she didn't want to do what she was asked. Vanessa leaned in and said, "I need your help." Mia raised an eyebrow, not impressed. "With what?" Vanessa clenched her teeth and tried to calm down. "I need to talk to Olivia before we land," she said angrily. "You want me to ask her for a meeting after everything?" Mia laughed dryly. "I just need to explain myself," Vanessa insisted. "I need to fix this." Mia crossed her arms and asked, "Explain what, Vanessa, that you grabbed her, that you tried to kick her out of first class." Vanessa clenched her fists and tried to hold back her anger. "I didn't know who she was," Mia said. "That's the problem." Mia shook her head and said, "You don't need my help, you need a miracle." Without saying another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Vanessa to deal with the crushing truth of her situation. She had squandered too many relationships, and now no one was willing to help her. Vanessa sat still in the crew jump seat and stared blankly ahead at the aisle. The truth Mia had just told her hurt more than she wanted to admit. No one was going to help her. She was on her own. Her fingers twitched in her lap. As Vanessa looked at Olivia again, the woman still hadn't looked her way or acknowledged her. She didn't need to. Vanessa knew she had lost, but she wasn't ready to accept it. There had to be something she could do before the plane landed. She forced herself to stand, swallowing hard, and decide that if Mia wouldn't help her, she would do it herself. Ignoring the way some passengers turned their heads, she walked toward Olivia's seat with her hands clenched and stopped just next to her. She took a sharp breath before. For the first time in what seemed like forever, Olivia turned her head, but Olivia didn't say anything. Her face was calm, and her baby was still sleeping on her chest. Vanessa felt smaller than she thought she would, so she cleared her throat and said, "I'm sorry." Olivia didn't say anything, but she just watched her. Vanessa's heart raced as she said, "I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. I made a mistake." Olivia didn't say anything. Vanessa shifted her weight and said, "I didn't know who you were." Olivia put up a hand to stop Vanessa in the middle of a sentence and asked, "If I had known." Olivia tilted her head slightly to show that if I wasn't James Carter's wife, this wouldn't have been a mistake. Olivia's voice stayed quiet and steady as she asked, "Would you have apologized if I was just another passenger?" Vanessa opened her mouth but nothing came out because she knew the answer, and so did Olivia. There was a long, thick silence between them. Olivia finally let out a slow breath and said, "I don't need your apology." Vanessa's breath caught, but Olivia turned her gaze back to the window, ending the conversation. Vanessa stood there, frozen, feeling exposed and helpless. Then she heard it, a small murmur from nearby, a quiet laugh from a passenger, and a low whisper from another row. She felt humiliated all over again, and as she turned away, she had to force herself to walk back toward the crew section, her steps heavy, her throat dry. She had hoped that this would help. Olivia had already made up her mind, and Vanessa had just sealed her fate. Vanessa walked stiffly down the aisle, her steps heavy, and her face burning with shame. The first-class passengers no longer pretended not to see. Some were staring, others exchanged quiet smirks, and a few whispered to each other behind queued hands. Vanessa could hear bits and pieces of their conversations. Olivia thought she was in charge, but now she's the one begging. Did you see how she froze? She knows it's over. Even though her stomach hurt, she kept walking, forcing her face to stay neutral. She had spent years keeping her posture straight and her emotions in check, but this was out of her hands. When she got to the back of the plane, she grabbed the nearest seat for balance and sank back into the crew jump seat. Her breath was all over the place as she tried to process everything. Olivia hadn't just refused her apology, she had completely ignored her, just like Vanessa had ignored many others. No second chances, no way to make things right, just complete and total rejection, and that wasn't even the worst part. The plane was still in the air, but Vanessa knew things would get worse when they landed. She turned her head slightly toward the galley, where Mia was standing pretending to focus on the drink card. Vanessa could tell Mia had heard the whole thing. She didn't say anything, but the slight shake of her head told Vanessa everything she needed to know. She had embarrassed herself again. Vanessa clenched her teeth and gripped the edge of her seat. This wasn't fair. All she had done was follow the rules. Why did one mistake, one miscalculation, mean she lost everything? Her mind raced with ideas for how to get out of this mess. Maybe she could talk to the captain again and ask him to reconsider. Maybe she could say she was under a lot of stress and hadn't meant for things to get this bad. Maybe she could talk to someone at corporate who might listen before it was too late. She reached for her phone when she unlocked her phone, a new wave of fear hit her. Her company credentials had been taken away. She tried to open the airline's crew scheduling app, but she was told she didn't have access. She checked her messages and saw that there were no new notifications, calls, or messages of support from anyone inside. She took a deep breath and scrolled through her contacts. She had worked with so many people over the years, training new employees and building relationships with higher-ups, but now as she hovered over the names of old co-workers, she wasn't sure if they would pick up or even want to be linked to her. Before she even called the number, she realized that no one would help her. She let go of the phone, clenching her hands in her lap. This was real. She wasn't just losing this flight, she was losing her whole career. There was a sharp chime in the cabin, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent. Please ensure that your seat belts are fastened and your trays are in the upright position. Flight attendants, get ready for landing." Vanessa's stomach dropped. This was it. As soon as the plane touched down, she would no longer be a flight attendant. She would no longer be respected. She would no longer have anything she had worked for. And worst of all, she knew what James Carter had planned for her when she got off the plane. The descent felt like the longest time of her life. The engine's hum filled her ears, but all she could hear was her own heartbeat. She sat frozen in the crew jump seat, her fingers curled around the edges as if she tried to hold on to the last bit of control she had, but there was none left. Her passengers moved around her, buckling their seat belts and adjusting their belongings as if this were just another flight. They would land, get their bags, and go on with their lives, but for her, as soon as those wheels hit the ground, everything she had worked for would be over. The seatbelt light flashed on with a sharp ding, and the final announcement came, "Cabin crew, please take your seats for landing." Other flight attendants quickly checked rows one last time, put their carts away, and took their seats. No one looked at her, not Mia, not the others, not even Rose herself. She had been part of this team just hours before, a senior attendant and leader, but now she was a ghost sitting in the back waiting for her sentence to be carried out. She swallowed the lump in her throat and turned her attention to Olivia in first class. She still hadn't acknowledged her, but she was sitting calmly in her seat, stroking her baby's back, and looking out the window as if she were. The baby slept soundly against his mother's chest, as if making fun of Vanessa's earlier complaints. Vanessa's nails dug into her palms. How had she lost so quickly? How had one mistake ruined everything? But it wasn't just one mistake, was it? That was the thought she had been trying to hide. It wasn't a single moment of bad judgment. It was years of thinking she was untouchable and that rules only applied to passengers, not to her. She had built her reputation on being strict and controlling. Authority on making sure everyone knew she was in charge, and now, for the first time, she was being controlled. The plane jolted slightly as the landing gear came out. The people around her didn't seem to notice, but to Vanessa, it felt like a warning that the ground was coming fast. The last second seemed to go on forever, and then there was a sharp thud as the wheels hit the runway and the plane rumbled forward. The landing was smooth and normal, and the passengers barely reacted before reaching for their bags. Vanessa was stretching after a long flight, but that sound was the end of everything for her. Her breath came short and shallow, and she clenched the seat beneath her. She was officially lost. The plane slowed down as it approached the gate, and Vanessa forced herself to look forward. She could see the gate through the small window near the galley, and her stomach turned violently as she saw that 2 uniformed security officers and a group of airline workers were waiting for her just beyond the jet bridge. Executives weren't waiting for the passengers or the flight crew, they were waiting for her. She took a deep breath and screamed, "No, no, this wasn't just a disciplinary meeting. This wasn't just a quiet termination. This was going to be public." In all her years of working as a flight attendant, she had never seen a crew member get escorted off a plane in front of passengers. It was embarrassing and degrading, but that was exactly why James Carter had set it up this way. He wasn't just firing her, he was making an example of her. She tried to swallow, but her throat was too dry. The plane finally stopped at the gate, and another chime rang through the cabin as people unbuckled, stood up, reached for the overhead bins, and chatted as if they hadn't just seen the worst moment in someone's career. Vanessa couldn't move, her body felt like dead weight. She watched as Olivia calmly gathered her things while standing up and adjusting the baby against her shoulder. Olivia had already won, the cockpit door opened and the captain stepped out. His eyes met Vanessa's for a brief second, and though his face couldn't be read, there was something final in his gaze, no pity, no anger, just finality. Mia walked past her, pausing for a moment as if she might say something, but she didn't. Instead, she gave Vanessa a small shake of her head and moved on. Vanessa wanted to scream and demand. Someone yelled for her to fight, but it was too late, she had already been erased. Suddenly, a new voice broke the silence. "Miss Holt, please gather your belongings and exit the aircraft immediately." It was an airline executive standing just inside the jet bridge. With arms crossed and eyes wide, some passengers turned their heads in interest, while others who had already heard the rumors watched with interest. Some even pulled out their phones to pretend to check their notifications, but Vanessa knew they were recording her. She could barely breathe, and Olivia finally spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. She wasn't bragging or angry, she was just done. "I hope you remember this." Vanessa's body froze. She slowly turned her head, and for the first time since their fight, Olivia was looking straight at her. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but there were no words left to say. Security stepped forward, and Vanessa Holt, one of the most feared flight attendants on this airline, took her last walk down the aisle. She was no longer in charge, and each step felt like lead. The aisle, which had always been hers to command, now stretched out in front of her like a gauntlet. She could hear everything: the soft hum of the overhead lights, the quiet murmurs of passengers, and the clicking of phones recording. Each step felt heavier than the last. She tried to keep her chin up, but she couldn't stop. Even though security didn't touch her or grab her by the arm, just being there sent the message, "You don't belong here anymore." As she moved from row to row, she felt the weight of every stare in the first-class section. Some people watched in silence, their faces unreadable, while others, who had seen everything from the start, exchanged glances and whispered, "She looks like she's going to be sick. Did you see the way she spoke?" She froze because she wasn't expecting this. "I bet she can't slap the CEO's wife and get away with it." Vanessa clenched her jaw so hard it hurt. She wanted to yell at them to shut up and understand what had happened, but what was the point? Even she knew the truth. Now she had done this to herself. Her mind went back to all the times she had picked passengers off the bus or used her power to put someone down instead of lifting them up. She had spent years making sure she was the one who made the rules. Who deserved what, and now the silence she had used to control others was being used against her. She looked at Olivia as she walked by her seat. The mother was adjusting the strap on her bag and shifting the baby's weight on her shoulder. She wasn't watching the van walk by, she wasn't smirking or looking happy, she just wasn't interested. Vanessa didn't know why, but that hurt the most. She had been expecting Olivia to be angry or even happy, like Olivia had been waiting for this moment. Olivia was already moving on to something else, and Vanessa wasn't important enough to keep her attention anymore. She got to the front of the plane, where two uniformed security officers were waiting with a group of airline executives. One of the executives, a woman in a navy blue suit with a company badge on her blazer, stepped forward and said, "Miss Holt, you'll be escorted to the administrative office right away." She said this in a cool, professional voice, as if she were talking to a stranger. Vanessa barely recognized her. But she knew what that meant. She was no longer a co-worker or an airline member. She was just another problem that needed to be dealt with. She spoke up, still trying to convince the executive that this could be fixed in some way, but she didn't wait for her to finish. Instead, she turned and started walking down the jet bridge, expecting Vanessa to follow. Security officers stood on either side of her, their presence silent but firm. As she got off the plane, the whispers behind her didn't stop, and she could still feel the weight of those words. Her name was already getting around the airline industry and social media, and she had spent years making sure everyone knew her authority. Now they were all watching as it was taken away from her. The walk down the jet bridge was the longest of her life. As she moved, her thoughts raced through her head. What would she do now? Where would she go? She had spent so many years building her life around her job. Without it, who was she? The doors at the end of the bridge were empty. When the jet bridge opened, she saw James Carter standing just outside of security. Her stomach dropped. He wasn't wearing a suit like the executives around him. His sleeves were rolled up, and his posture was casual, but there was nothing casual about the way he looked at her. His expression was calm and calculated, but his eyes had the power to make her want to disappear. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a firing, this was something more serious. When Vanessa locked eyes with James Carter, her breath caught. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or standing behind a wall of executives. He didn't need to be. His presence alone made the air in the terminal feel heavier. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and his stance was casual, but there was a quiet force in the way he carried himself. He was the type of man who never had to raise his voice to command a room, and now he was looking right at her. She could feel her heart racing in her temples. She had seen powerful men before, businessmen who flew first class every week and corporate executives who thought their money made them untouchable. But James Carter wasn't just rich, he was also dangerous in a way that wasn't physical. This was a man who could ruin her career with one word, and he already had the security guards stocked just short of him, giving her room to move forward. But she hesitated, feeling every nerve in her body screaming for her to turn around and face him. James didn't change his face. He said, "You have something to say." His voice was steady and calm, almost too calm. Vanessa opened her mouth and then closed it again. What could she say that she was sorry that she didn't know who Olivia was and that she hadn't meant to cross any lines? It sounded weak, even in her own head, but she had to try. "I made a mistake," she forced out. James tilted his head just enough to make the word unreadable, and he said it again as if to test it. Vanessa swallowed hard. He looked at her with sharp eyes, and she quickly cut herself off because she knew it wasn't the right thing to say. It wasn't about who Olivia was. That was the part she hadn't understood at first. That was why Mia, the other passengers, and the captain had turned against her so quickly. She had treated Olivia like she didn't belong. She had judged and fired her, which was the real mistake. James watched her in silence, giving her time to either keep going or dig her grave deeper. Vanessa forced herself to breathe. "I shouldn't have." She corrected herself. "Quiet now. That was wrong." James slowly shifted his weight. "You shouldn't have." His agreement sent another wave of panic through her because there was no but, no hint of leniency in his tone, and no way for her to fix this. "I was just trying to do my job," she said, her voice desperation creeping into it. James finally took a step forward, not aggressive or threatening, but enough to make her feel small. "Your job," he repeated. She knew she was going into dangerous territory, but she went ahead anyway. People pay for first class to be quiet, so she couldn't help but speak. James raised his hand, and she stopped talking right away. His voice stayed steady, but it had the weight of a final decision. "First class isn't about quiet," he said, "it's about respect." Vanessa swallowed, and he broke the silence before continuing. "My wife paid for that seat," he said, "just like everyone else. She didn't ask for special treatment or demand anything. She just wanted to sit there like any other passenger." Clenched her fists, but she didn't dare answer. James's voice didn't rise, it hardened, and you decided he continued before even checking or thinking that she didn't belong there. She looked down at the floor because he was right. She hadn't seen Olivia as a first-class passenger when she looked at her. She saw an inconvenience, a problem that needed to be dealt with, and she had done something about it right away. James let the silence last for a while longer, then finally sighed and shook his head. "I don't care if you were." He told her, "It doesn't matter if you thought you were protecting other passengers or what excuse you try to come up with. You had a choice, and you made the wrong one." His words were the heaviest she had heard all day because they weren't just words, they were a sentence. He turned to the executive standing nearby and spoke as if she weren't even there anymore. "She's done," he said. Vanessa's breath caught. It wasn't just this job, it was everything there. The executive in the navy blue suit nodded and said, "Sir." James turned back to her one last time and said, "There's a car waiting outside. You'll be escorted to collect your belongings from the crew office after that you're gone." Vanessa's mouth dropped open. All the connections she had worked for, all her seniority, and all her respect were gone. James gave her one last look and said, "Enjoy your last time in an airport." He then walked away, leaving Vanessa frozen, unable to move or breathe. She wasn't just being fired, she was. Her name would be blacklisted across the whole industry, and no airline or company would touch her. One of the security officers moved next to her and said quietly, "Miss Holt." She swallowed hard, her throat burning. She could fight, argue, beg, but it wouldn't matter. James Carter had already spoken, and his word was final. Vanessa turned and followed the security officers to the terminal, her steps heavy, her heart pounding with each step. Every minute that went by took her further away from the life she had known, and she realized for the first time that the power she thought she had was never really hers. Vanessa walked through the terminal in a day, her steps mechanical and her body moving only because she had to. Security officers stood on either side of her, their presence a silent warning that there would be no second chances and no last-minute reprieves. People were rushing to their gates and dragging their bags toward baggage claim. For them, it was just another day, but for Vanessa, it was the last time she would ever step foot in an airport as an airline worker. She had spent years walking these terminals with authority, her uniform clean and shiny, her presence commanding. Now, she was just another person being let out. The rumors followed her. Some people recognized her from the flight, their eyes lingering for just a second too long before they quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. Others had already heard the news. She was fired in the middle of the flight, which must have been a big mistake. She could hear the quiet voices behind her saying that it was her. Vanessa's fingers twitched and her nails dug into the palm of her hand. She wanted to scream and snap at them to tell them they didn't understand, but what would be the point? The doors ahead slid open with a soft hiss, and the rush of outside air hit her like a slap. She stepped out into the arrivals area and blinking against the harsh afternoon light, she saw the black. A sleek, unmarked sedan with tinted windows was waiting for her. One of the security guards pointed toward it and said, "Your ride is here, Miss Holt." Vanessa's heart raced. This wasn't a company shuttle or just an escort to pick up her things. This was James Carter making sure she left his airline personally. As she approached the car, the driver, a man in a dark suit, stepped out and opened the door for her without saying a word. Vanessa hesitated for a second before making up her mind. There was no way she could get out of that car once she got in, but she had no choice. She swallowed hard and slid inside. The door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing her inside the cool, dimly lit space. The leather seats smelled expensive, and the quiet hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. The driver got in and put the car into gear. Crew office first. He said, it wasn't a question, but Vanessa's throat tightened. The driver didn't look at her after that. "I'll take you to the..." She was upset because she knew what that meant, not just fired, but banned as well. Her hands were curled into fists on her lap. She had heard of this happening before with crew members who broke serious rules and employees who did things so bad that they weren't just fired, but their names were sent to every major airline and their records were marked in a way that meant they could never work in the industry again. She had never thought it would happen to her. The car drove smoothly down the road, and the airport shrunk. She looked out the window at the terminal passing by. This was the same terminal she had walked through thousands of times, greeting passengers, checking rosters, and getting orders. Now she was leaving it behind for good. Part of her wanted to believe there was still a way out, maybe if she talked to the right people, If she reached out to someone high enough, she could explain herself, she could change the story. But then she remembered how James Carter had looked at her the last time she saw him. The tone of his voice made her feel like she had crossed a line and there was no going back. The drive to the crew office seemed like it would never end, but eventually the car came to a stop. The driver didn't say a word, he just opened his door, walked around the car, and pulled Vanessa's door open. Vanessa hesitated, she wasn't ready, she didn't want to go inside and face what was waiting for her, but she had to. With a slow, measured breath, she stepped out. The crew office entrance was smaller than the main terminal and had always been hidden from visitors. She had gone to this place before on duty, looked over flight schedules, and laughed with co-workers in the break room, but now it felt like enemy territory. When she pushed through the doors, the first person she saw was Ethan Varr, her boss. He was standing near the front desk with a folder in his hands, and his expression was blank. Vanessa stiffened. She hadn't talked to him much before because he was new to management and still figuring out his place. Just a few weeks ago, she would have ignored him, but now he was the one haggling. Miss Holt was fired, he told her, looking at the security guards behind her before looking back at the folder. "Let's get this over with," she asked, her voice quieter than she meant. Ethan didn't react to James Carter's orders, which was all he needed to say. Vanessa's hand shook as he opened the folder and slid a set of papers onto the desk in front of her. "Sign these," he told her, but she hesitated, looking at the big letters at the top of the page that said termination of employment. She had been the one writing up reports, punishing employees, and enforcing rules. She had never been on this side of the process. She forced herself to breathe and grab the pen. As she scrawled her signature across the paper, it looked shaky. Ethan turned the page and said, "You'll also need to acknowledge this." She scanned the next document, and her vision got a little blurry. It said, "Permanent employment flag, no rehire status." She clenched her hand around the pen, which meant, "I can't. You won't work." Once more in the airline industry, Ethan confirmed that not under any airline associated with our network. Vanessa's breath came short and fast, and the words, "complete exile," came out before she could stop them. She had been ready for that much, but this was something else. Her hand shook as she signed the paper, and Ethan didn't look at her as he put it back into the folder. Vanessa's stomach dropped. This was it. She hesitated as she reached for the pin on her chest that held her name badge. The badge had once stood for years of experience, authority, and respect, but now it didn't mean anything. She slowly unpinned it and put it on the desk. Then, with even more hesitation, she took off her uniform jacket. The fabric felt heavier than it ever had before, so she folded it neatly and put it next to the badge. Ethan nodded toward the security officers and said, "She's done here." Vanessa flinched at the harsh words, "Just like that you're done." One of the officers pointed toward the door. She stepped back into the car like it was second nature, and when the door shut, she knew she couldn't go back. The car pulled away from the crew office and began to drive toward the airport exit. As she stared out the window at the world she had once ruled slipping away, one terrifying thought hit her more than any other. For the first time in her life, she had nowhere to go. The car moved smoothly down the road, separating Vanessa from the only life she had ever known. The late afternoon sun shone through the airport terminal's glass windows, and for a moment she could see herself in the reflection. The woman staring back at her was so distorted and stretched out that she barely recognized her. She had come into the airport earlier that day as Vanessa Holt, senior flight attendant, the one who set the rules and made sure they were followed. Now she was no one. The realization hit her like a lead brick, and she sat stiffly in the back seat, her hands on the windowsill, holding her hands tightly together in her lap. The security guards were gone, as if they were no longer needed. The driver was silent, his face blank. He was just another worker doing his job. James Carter had planned the whole thing so smoothly and efficiently that Vanessa had been erased before she even had a chance to fight back. Her mind replayed everything from the moment Olivia got on the plane to the way she had slapped her and told her she didn't belong to the text to the way the captain had. James Carter's voice on the radio, Olivia's last words to her, "I hope you remember this," were the worst things Vanessa could think of. She would remember every second, every embarrassing moment. She had always thought that power belonged to those who took it, that authority was something you kept over others by showing strength, by never giving up, but Olivia had done the exact opposite. She hadn't fought, yelled, or demanded anything, she had just waited. She had let someone else do the damage. James Carter fired Vanessa from the airline as if she were a smudge on his perfectly polished company. What was even worse was that she had spent years thinking she couldn't be hurt. She had treated passengers like bothersomeness, crew members like subordinates, and rules like things she could bend to suit her needs, and now she was the problem. As the car pulled up to the airport's outer perimeter and got closer to the main road, Vanessa's mouth went dry. This was it. Once she crossed this line, she would no longer work for the airline. She wouldn't be a flight attendant. She wouldn't be anything. Her chest tightened as the security gate rose and let the car through. She turned her head one last time and looked back. The airport tower stood tall against the sky, and in the distance, planes took off, carrying passengers to places she would never reach again. The realization hit her all at once, suffocating her. This wasn't just a job. Her whole life had been that, and now it was over. Her hands shook in her lap. She had no backup plan, no backup job, and no network of people who could help her. She had spent so much time climbing the rising, pushing others aside in her pursuit of control, that she had never stopped to think about what would happen if she fell, and now she had. Suddenly, her phone vibrated in her bag, waking her up. She hesitated before pulling it out, half expecting it to be a message from the airline, but when she looked at it wasn't a message, it was an email notification. Account login failed, your access has been revoked. As she scrolled through the emails, her hands got tighter around the phone as more came in. They said things like crew schedule no longer assigned to any flight's final payroll confirmation. Your last payment will be processed within 14 days. ID badge access disabled. You no longer have entry privileges. She had known it was real before, but seeing it happen in real time was shocking. Vanessa's short breath came quickly as the car slowed down at a busy intersection. The driver didn't say anything, they just waited for the light to change. Vanessa stared at her phone, seeing the cold final words on the screen. Then another email arrived. This one wasn't from the airline, it was from a job recruitment agency. Vanessa's brows furrowed as she read the short message. We're sorry to inform you that due to your recent termination in industry flag status, we are unable to immediately stop applying for any future jobs because word of her bad reputation had already spread. She had only been fired minutes before this happened, but already doors were closing on her. Panic filled her, and she opened a new search tab and typed in her own name. The results came up, and her stomach clenched as she saw that someone had already posted about her on an airline forum. A blurry photo of her walking down the aisle with security behind her was attached to the form. The post's caption made her want to scream. Vanessa Holt, first-class flight attendant, loses everything after slapping passenger karma. Her breathing became shallow. It was now public knowledge, and not just within the company or the industry. Everyone would see it. The car jerked forward again as the light turned green, and Vanessa barely noticed. She sat there, frozen, staring at her phone as her whole future fell apart in front of her. For years, she had made passengers feel small and unimportant. Now, for the first time in her life, she knew exactly what that felt like. and no one was left to save her. What do you think? Did she get what she deserved? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. Also, please share this story with someone who would enjoy it.